Welcome back to the stars, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the Regulator in Starfield. This is one of the big revolvers that you find. It very much looks similar, in at least profile, to the Blade Runner revolver. I think that is a really cool addition to this. We've seen this pop up in other Bethesda games, not only in Fallout New Vegas, but also in Fallout 1 and 2 as well, and it's a pretty cool looking design. The Regulator is definitely one of the more high-powered handguns in the game, and at least for myself, I found this more in the mid-game than towards the early game. However, there is some spots where you could buy one of these early on, which is pretty cool. So, for the base Regulator, this one does 48 damage per shot, which is pretty high for a handgun. That's pretty good in terms of damage. Doesn't have a super fast rate of fire, so its DPS is still not bad, but it's not super high. Unless you put some mods on it, we'll talk about that in a second. This one holds 8 shots, so 2 more than what a standard revolver would hold, which is pretty good. Reload's fairly quick. It has 20 meters of effective range. That is the same as basically all the other handguns besides the Razorback. This one also has pretty high accuracy, as you would kind of expect for a gun like this. Somewhat of a slow rate of fire at 18, so not super quick. And it doesn't weigh anything like most of the handguns do. And this is one of 2 weapons that fires the 43 Ultra Mag. So it's only competing with one other weapon, that being the Urban Eagle, which is nice. It makes it so that it's very easy to compare the two, especially if you're going with a handgun build. And both of them are honestly pretty solid in their own ways. It's more personal preference than anything. For pros of the Regulator, I would say that it does really good damage per shot. It's pretty good at putting pressure on any enemies, so long as you're within the range of them. It does have a good selection of mods. That's another really good pro for this one. Even if you don't have a bunch of perks going into weapon mods, the base mods are still pretty decent for this. It has pretty good damage per second because its rate of fire is still decent, so good damage per second, and it has high accuracy, so it doesn't tend to go off target too often. For cons, there's only really like 2. One of them being that the Regulator is kind of rare. I didn't really find a whole lot of these just laying around. You can buy them from merchants, they're not super uncommon from them, but you're less likely to find like rare versions of this than some other weapons that are just more common. Not that it's going to be one of the most rare weapons that you're going to find, but it's not one of the most common weapons either. And ammo could be an issue because there's not really a whole lot of enemies that typically have the 43 Ultra Mag, and even though you can buy it fairly regularly from vendors, it is a little bit on the pricier side, at least for handgun bullets. Assuming you have a decent amount of money, that's not going to be an issue either. Recently on my handgun tier list, I put the Regular up into B tier, and I would probably say it's a high B tier. It's a pretty good overall weapon. Kind of does the job that you would expect. Isn't anything crazy, but it's still just above average in my opinion. So now let's talk about a modded version, and the modded version that I would use with this, which you do actually have a pretty good selection of options, and it does make the gun quite a bit better. So for a barrel, I would recommend the extended barrel on here. This will just get you the most accuracy, the longest range, the best recoil. It just decreases your ADS speed and it increases the weight of the gun. Not a huge deal, especially for more of a magnum weapon, so you can kind of use it at long range. It's probably one of the better handguns to be using at long range, especially if you're just going with a specific handgun only build. For a laser, you either have no laser or the laser, so you might as well put that one on. That's how a lot of these weapons are. Either you put the laser or the recon laser, whichever one you like more, or you just don't have a laser because you don't really care about it, or you don't have the materials for it, whatever you want. For optics, I really like the glow sights for this one. Iron sights are actually pretty decent on this. Reflex sight is not my favorite, but I know some people really enjoy it, so if you want to take that one, go for it. This one's totally personal preference. I just like the glow sights a little bit more. For a muzzle, I'd recommend that you put a suppressor on this. If you're going with the sneak perk, you get more damage with it. We've talked about this in the other weapon guide builds, where the suppressor is generally the better option, assuming you have that perk. If not, then the compensator or the muzzle brake are also pretty good. Pick whichever one you would like. Then for a magazine, I'd recommend one of 3. I would recommend either going with armor-piercing rounds, tactical magazine, or with the penetrator rounds. White hot rounds are also kind of okay. So honestly, any of the magazines are pretty decent. White hot rounds I just don't find that useful because I find them more useful on faster shooting weapons where they can apply it quicker. Regulator doesn't shoot super quick. So armor-piercing rounds is just a straight upgrade to the gun. It gets you more consistent damage towards targets. That one's just nice, and it's low leveled, so you don't need to put a whole bunch of points in. Tactical magazine can also be pretty good because it's just an all-around upgrade to the weapon. You reload faster, you can ADS faster, and it makes your gun a little bit lighter, so all of that is just a really nice upgrade. And then the penetrator rounds are the ones that I went with. The penetrator rounds increase your damage by the most that you can with this weapon in terms of just raw flat damage, and it can also punch through multiple enemies. Punching through multiple enemies can be kind of useful in certain situations. It's not going to come up super often. You're mostly just taking this for the straight damage buff. Then for an internal, honestly all the internals are pretty good on the Regulator. Pick whichever one you would like. You can go with the hair trigger, the high velocity, or the high powered. Hair trigger will just make it so you can shoot faster. That does actually make the Regulator pretty good. I do have a rapid Regulator that I use fairly often and I really enjoy it, so stacking that on top of it just makes it so I can shoot a little bit quicker. Pretty cool. The high velocity gives you longer range. That's just a nice bonus if you want to be using this at longer range, which this is one of the better longer range handguns. So if you want this as like your sniper pistol, you could do that. And then the high powered is also good because it just gets you more damage, and that's why I threw in mine, but again, any of them are fine. And then finally we have the receiver that we can talk about, which you can either put semi-auto or the binary trigger in. I personally don't really like the binary trigger because I find it just feels really weird to me, so I avoid it. However, this one doesn't nerf your damage or anything on this particular weapon, so you can just get a higher rate of fire and more damage per second out of this quicker. So if you like that and you want to be using this at close range, the binary trigger can be a really good option. Personally, I just like the semi-auto version, so that way I can just keep shooting at somewhat longer range with this. With the modded version of the Regulator being quite a bit better than the regular Regulator, I would move this up a tier. I would probably put this into the high A tier, maybe bordering on S tier. I don't think that this weapon is anything crazy. It's not like the last weapon we talked about with the double barrel where it is really crazy. This one is just an all-around really solid handgun and just fits the role really well. So if you want to take this as your sidearm or even as a sniper type pistol, it can work really well in those roles. Now there is two unique versions of the Regulator that you can get. One of these you can get from a quest line from blackmailing the ambassador, funny enough, and one of them you can just buy in Aquila. The one that you can buy in Aquila is called Elegance. This one has a few modifications to it where it's got a reflex sight, it's got a suppressor, it's got the penetrator rounds, it's got the high powered, and it's got a binary trigger, so this one's actually quite good to start out with. It also has one unique effect, which is a really good effect, that being shattering. Shattering is basically armor piercing on top of your weapon, which is always going to be a good choice. There's no downside to that whatsoever on any weapon. Since you can buy this in Aquila too, so long as you got the credits, you can get this one super early on and it will be a pretty solid weapon for most of the game, if not all of the game, at least on your first playthrough. Probably will fall off towards the latter half just because you're going to be getting upgraded versions of it, but as soon as you get to New Game Plus, it'll be relevant again. The second unique one, called the Ambassador, you do have to get during a quest. You have to blackmail the Ambassador to get this, and this one has quite a few upgrades on it as well. It's got a long barrel, laser sight, reflex sight, a compensator, the penetrator rounds, high velocity, and it's also got a binary trigger. However, this one does not have any unique effect whatsoever on it. So it's just unique in name alone, which is kind of disappointing, but still, if you get this early on, because you can do this quest pretty early on, it's still going to be quite strong for you, assuming you also have enough persuasion to get this. So that brings us to the major question: should you be using the Regulator? And I would say, yeah, absolutely. The Regulator is really good, unless you're not going with a handguns build or you're not going with a ballistics build. I don't really see a point in not using the Regulator. It will work pretty well so long as you got ammo for it. Both this and the Urban Eagle, I would say, are fairly comparable to one another in terms of ammo because they both function pretty similar. They both have similar mods and similar upgrades. This one, I think, can actually get a little bit more DPS than it, too, with the binary trigger, so if you like that, that would be a more tempting option. But both of them work really well in, like, a Magnum role. Whichever one you enjoy more, just take that one, or take both and switch between them. That's what I did too. Tell me what your thoughts are down in the comments below on the Regulator. How do you enjoy it? Do you use it? Do you not use it? And for what reasons? Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye!